This episode of Smart Poker Study is brought to you by my upcoming Opponent Destruction webinar. It'll be held on Tuesday, November 29th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. In this webinar, I'll show you how I work off the tables to analyze my most common opponents' games so that I can exploit them on the tables. I'll show you how to search for your opponent's pre- and post-flop tendencies, their range selections, how they approach different hand strengths by street, and many other things. I'll then show you how you can plan to use their tendencies against them in every session you play. Visit www.smartpokerstudy.com/opponent destruction webinar for more info and to purchase now. Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, I hope you caught episode 105, where I discussed value 3-bets. Make sure you listen to that, as it's the yin to this episode's yang of 3-bet bluffs. Hey, poker people, what's the haps on the craps? Couple of things for me today. Thanksgiving is coming up, so the kids are now out of school for an entire week, and I had my first interview! Yep, Robert Dewberry, the creator of thepokermonk.com, he actually interviewed me. It was an email interview that he sent over with, it was like 30 questions or so, and I answered every single one. And I'd like to think I said some thought-provoking stuff, but you can be the judge of that. You can find the interview at www.smartpokerstudy.com/thepokermonkinterview, or just go to thepokermonk.com, and it's the first blog post up there at the top of the page, you know. After you read the interview, check out the rest of the PokerMonk blog to see what else Robert writes about. He's a good writer, and it'll definitely be worth your time. I always enjoy his article. Alrighty then, Bluff 3-betting time, baby. So, for a quick overview of today's episode, as you know, this entire series is the yin-yang of 3-betting. Last time we discussed value 3-bets, so let's get aggressive with some bluff 3-bet talk today. In this episode, I'll discuss why it's super important to have a reason for every single bet you make, and how it's even more crucial in 3-bet pots. I'll next get into the factors that lead to more successful 3-bet bluffing. You've got to look for things like fold equity, position, opponent's opening ranges, weak post-flop skills, and whether or not they have a fold button. I'll get into each of those. Also, when discussing bluffing, I've got to share my thoughts on the difference between bluffs and semi-bluffs. And there is a small difference there, but it's kind of important for the 3-bet bluffing game. And I'll also talk shortly about the break-even math of bluff 3-betting. I've discussed this quite a bit in few episodes in the past. I mean, you've all heard me talk about break-even bluff math before. But the episode wouldn't be complete without some math talk at least. And lastly, I'll dive into everyone's favorite play, the 3-bet squeeze. Wow, and looking at my notes here for this episode, man, it's got a lot of great stuff, and it will definitely aid you in making bluff 3-bets, but there's so much of it that you've really got to hit the show notes for everything I discussed today, along with some of the screenshots and links to stuff I discuss at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod107. And while you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy direct to your inbox. Okay, let's do this. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
So when you're making your 3-bet, whether it's bluff or value, you've got to have a reason for doing so. Back in episode number 49, I covered a leak that many players have, and that's betting for no reason. Some people bet, they raise, or they 3-bet just to do it. You know, they say things like, hey, gotta keep my 3-bet percentage high, I gotta put that pressure on, baby. Well, I know that this was definitely a motivation for me when I started to up my aggression. But eventually I found that without having a good reason to 3-bet, it was more likely I would just burn chips by 3-betting it at unprofitable times, you know, thinking I was going for value or thinking I was bluffing and the guy wasn't going to fold no matter what, you know, just stupid times to 3-bet. And due to the increased size of 3-bet pots, it's even more crucial to know why you're making the 3-bet. There's more profit potential with the bloated 3-bet pots, but also this makes for more costly mistakes. So think about like a 2-bet pot with a bet and a call on all three streets. 2-bet pots are often maybe 7 to 8 big blinds on the flop. After a bet and a call, we're looking at a turn pot of about 17 big blinds. Another bet and a call, and the river pot is 41 big blinds. Then a final bet and a call will bring the pot up to about 95 big blinds. That's pretty darn big, and you've committed around 47 big blinds up to this point. And so, of course, that's pretty costly. If you started at a cash game 100 BB stack, there's 100, not 100, there's 50% of your stack in there already. But what about a 3-bet pot? These are often around 19 big blinds on the flop. After a bet and a call, it jumps to around 45 big blinds on the turn. A bet and a call takes us up to a whopping 106 big blind pot on the river. It's already, before showdown, it's already at 100 big blinds. Then, after a final bet and a call, the showdown pot is at 250 big blinds, assuming you had over 125 big blinds to start the hand. If you both had 100, it would just be, 200 big blind pot, and you'd both be all in. And I did put a screenshot of this in the show notes, and as you can see, there is so much more to gain and to lose in 3-bet pots. It's exponential growth, It's like the eighth wonder of the world, according to Einstein. Compound interest, The bigger the initial pot is, the bigger it gets as the streets progress, because bigger betting just leads to bigger pots, and it's a bigger showdown pot in 3-bet versus 2-bet pots. And this is why it's crucial to have a solid reason for your 3-bet. Remember, if you're 3-betting for value, you expect your opponent to continue with worse, and you're happy when he does. When 3-bet bluffing, you expect your opponent to be able to fold better hands, and you're happy when he does. Value 3-bets want action. Bluff 3-bets want folds. Write that down. Alrighty, so let's talk about getting better at 3-bet bluffing. When you're 3-bet bluffing, there are 3 things to consider. Number 1 is the opponent. Number 2, your cards. And number 3, those yet to act. So we'll go ahead and hit each of those here. Oh, and before we do, a few seconds ago, I said that bluff 3-bets want folds. This is a key concept to remember during the rest of this episode. When you're bluff 3-betting, you want folds all around. So the first thing to consider when you're making your bluff 3-bet is the opponent. You want to ask yourself these questions. What's his opening range? How will he likely respond? What range does he continue with? And does he have any post-flop weaknesses? When you give critical thought to these questions, you'll often come up with the right answer. And this is really illustrated by a great point here. The other day, I was going through my 3-bet bluff hands, and I found one where I 3-bet in the small blind versus a donk cutoff opener. The guy was super aggressive. His stats were 65-29, and he had a fold to 3-bet of 20%. I've seen him call 3-bets with hands like King Deuce suited and Jack Deuce suited. He limp called 9-8 offsuit. And he called 2-bets with 4-3 suited, Ace-King offsuit, and King-7 offsuit. So this guy has a wide range of hands that he likes to get to the flop with. He's a 65-29 player. These guys love to get aggressive, but they also love to see flops. Also, his fold to c-bet on the flop is 45%, or 5 out of 11 instances, and his turn fold to c-bet was 0% out of 2 instances. So he doesn't like to give up post-flop from this small sample. No post-flop folding here for this guy. I actually had 8-7 suited, and I decided to 3-bet. Now, I might have been tilting or something, but let's answer these 4 questions that I just mentioned. We'll answer those with the info I just went over. So the first question was, what's his opening range? Well, in this instance, it's very wide. And this is good because the wider the opening range, the more often they'll fold to 3-bets in general. The nittier the opponent, the more likely they have a hand to defend with. So your bluffs will work less frequently against those nitty openers. At 65-29, he's got a super wide cutoff stealing range with lots of suited hands, pocket pairs, broadways, aces, kings, offsuit decent hands like Jack 9 and Queen 10. I mean, this guy's opening a very wide range in the cutoff. If I get called, my 8-7 suited plays pretty well against such a wide range. The next question to ask is, how will he likely respond? And this is where things get ugly, He's a 65-29 player. And looking at that gap between VPIP and PFR, there's a 36% difference. This difference is his propensity to call. He calls a super wide range, and much of this range has an advantage over 8-7 suited. Also, it's a small sample of only 5 hands, but he folds to 3-bets only 20% of the time, which is not a good sign at all when I'm 3-bet bluffing. So he calls a lot. He doesn't fold to 3-bets that often, and he's got position on me, post-flop position on me. It's really not looking like a pretty spot to 3-bet at this point. The third question asked is what range does he continue with? So we can assume he's calling here given everything we know so far. If he 4-bets, we're just folding, of course, because we can't defend with the 8-7 suited out of position. So what's he calling us with? I am assuming he's 4-betting with, aces, kings, and queens, and with his propensity to call, he'll probably be calling his ace, kings, and his pocket jacks. I'm also thinking he'll call with every pocket pair, every ace, all broadways, all suited kings, all suited queens, and suited jacks as well. And of course, he'll be tossing in suited connectors and suited gappers and offsuit connectors. So you might disagree, but he's called very wide so far in my experience with him, and he's in position. So I think it's very reasonable that he's calling with a wide range of about 41% of hands, or 548 combos. And you can see a screenshot of this in the show notes, and yowza, that is a super wide range to be calling. Versus this range, I have 43% equity with the 8-7 suited. It's not too bad, but it's not a pretty spot to be in. I don't have card advantage, nor do I have positional advantage. I can argue that I've got skill advantage. Looking at his really donkish, laggish stats, I'm probably a better player than him. But without the other two advantages, this is far from a bread and butter situation. So the fourth question to ask is, does he have any post-flop weaknesses? And I mentioned his fold to c-bet on the flop is 45%. And his turn fold to c-bet was 0% out of 2 instances. Now, these numbers mean he doesn't like to fold post-flop. This is great if I have a value hand, or if I hit that flop super strong, but getting him to fold to my bluffs from out of position is a losing challenge, and it's one that I shouldn't jump into lightly. So if I would have answered these 4 questions before I made the 3-bet, I would have realized a call is much better in this spot with the 8-7 suited, and I had the small blind discount, I already have half a blind in there. But whether I call or 3-bet, I'm going post-flop versus this guy who he really is a non-folding donk no matter what. So I'd be better off doing so with a smaller pot to fight for. So that was the first thing to consider, your opponent. The second thing you need to consider is your cards and your perceived range. So beyond the opponent, you want to consider your cards and what cards your opponent thinks that you 3-bet with. So first off, we'll talk about your cards. I talked a lot about 3-bet ranges back in episode 94, which was the third class in MED number 1, which was about pre-flop ranges. So listen to that for my thoughts on 3-bet ranges and which hands to include in your 3-bet range versus your calling range. What I want to talk about now is the difference between complete bluffs and semi-bluff hands, as well as some blocker talk. So the cards you choose to 3-bet bluff with, they really do matter a heck of a lot. Some are complete bluffs like 10-5 offsuit. They have very little post-flop equity and no blocking power at all. You absolutely do not want any calls with this hand. Conversely, a semi-bluff 3-bet hand like ace-5 suited, that has some great post-flop equity. It has decent top pair possibilities, as well as flush and straight draw possibilities. Plus, having that ace as a blocker means that he's less likely to have pocket aces, ace-king, ace-queen, or even ace-jack. And let's look at the math on that real quick. If we've got 7-8 suited, this doesn't block any of his possible strong hands. He's got a total of 54 combos of pocket aces, ace-king, ace-queen, and ace-jack. But if we've got ace-5 suited, then he's only got 39 possible combos of aces, ace-king, ace-queen, and ace-jack. That's a whopping 30% decrease in strong hands, just because we have that ace. And because it's a 30% decrease in strong hands, he can't continue versus a 3-bet that often. Now, this ups your chances of getting the folds you're looking for when you're 3-bet bluffing. So to increase your chances of successful 3-bet bluffing, choose blocking hands with some post-flop equity in case you do get called. Okay, so those are your cards. The other thing you want to think about is your perceived range. And it's great when your opponent thinks you only 3-bet with value hands, because you either don't 3-bet that often, or you've only ever shown down strong hands to him when you've 3-bet. And if you 3-bet too frequently, then your opponents will expect you to have a garbage hand, quite often, a good percentage of the time, and they can fight back accordingly. So there is a careful balance to strike with your 3-bets, so your opponents fight back less often. You don't want to be 3-betting or 3-bet bluffing way too often, because then they'll just expect it way too often. You can control your 3-bet percentage by choosing good spots to run those bluffs. Choosing spots wisely, it'll naturally limit how often you 3-bet, and it will lead to more successful 3-bets. But it will also give your opponents the idea that you only do so for value, making your bluffs more likely to succeed. And I don't think many people do this, but make note when an opponent sees you show up with a total bluff. If you pulled the trigger on that 3-bet bluff with the 10-5 offsuit, and let's say for whatever reason you got to showdown with it, make note of it under the player that you 3-bet. If they're using PokerTracker 4, for example, it records what hands the opponent makes certain plays with, and 3-bet hands is one of those that it records. So if he's seen you do 10-5 off or 3-bet with 10-5 off before, it'll be in his notes and he'll expect it in the future. So knowing the type of hands that your opponent has seen you make those bluff 3-bets with, it'll give you an indication of how they view your 3-bets and your perceived range. And wow, that's a lot of stuff we've covered so far, thinking about your opponents and asking good questions to aid in 3-bet bluffing decisions. Also, the importance of your cards and your perceived range. So now let's get to the third and final part of making better 3-bet bluffs, and that is considering those who are yet to act. So when you make the 3-bet bluff, you're not just doing it versus the opening player. You're also 3-betting the players remaining at the table. You aren't technically 3-betting them because they didn't open, but they're facing a 3-bet. So you can view it that way, They can choose to fold, which is great, or they can call, ruh-roh, or they can make the dreaded 4-bet. Damn it! So there's one basic question to ask yourself regarding the players yet to act, and that is, how will they respond? By answering this question for each remaining player before you make your 3-bet, you won't be surprised or throw up in your mouth after what happens next. You'll simply respond accordingly. So, for example, maybe the cutoff, tight aggressive player, he's fit or fold post-flop, and he just calls you. Well, that's fine. You'll play the flop out of position accordingly, whether you hit or miss it. Maybe a button loose aggressive 4-better, he throws out the 4-bet. Well, you'll 5-bet rebluff with your ace blocking hand, or you'll just ditch your 8-7 suited. But the important thing is you planned it ahead of time because you know that this guy often throws out the 4-bets. And maybe the small blind nit, the super tight player, he 4-bet shoves on you. Well, the dude's got aces or kings at this point, so you just ditch the hand. No sweat, your bluff didn't work, 9 big blinds down the drain, so be it. At least you didn't call with your pocket jacks and get beaten by his pocket aces, And lastly, maybe a big blind station. He just calls as he does in almost every single hand. He's always calling, whether it's a 2-bet or a 3-bet pot. So you'll go for straight value post-flop. Otherwise, you'll save your post-flop bluffing chips for someone who can find the fold button. So plan ahead for what you'll do versus the 4-bet and respond accordingly. One thing I love about you listeners is all the support I get. I really appreciate it. One way you can support is by visiting our show sponsor, Habwin.com. Habwin, Habwin.com. I know you like online poker, just like this guy here. I'm holding up 2 thumbs if you didn't notice. What if you could win prizes at zero cost? With Habwin, you can play free, exclusive $100 free rolls on Party Poker and BWin. Check out our winter free rolls every Sunday at 8 p.m. Central European Time. You can jump at the opportunity to win extra cash completely for free. Register now at www.habwin.com/free rolls and start the fun. So if you can play on Party Poker or BWin, support the show by visiting Habwin and registering for free. Once again, that's www.habwin.com/free rolls. And it's time for a Patreon plug. If you support me on Patreon, you can get exclusive poker strategy content that I won't deliver anywhere else. There are different levels of support, and with each level comes different exciting rewards. At $5, you get Patreon exclusive podcasts. At $15, you get the podcast and a training video. And at the magnificent $50 level, you get the podcast, video, and a full 1.5-hour webinar every single month. For my October supporters, I just delivered a training video of a player targeting session where I played and successfully doubled up through the opponent I was targeting. I also delivered a podcast simply called Revenge, and in that podcast I discussed what to do when a player at the table is putting you on tilt. So if you support me for November within Patreon, I'll send you those 2 items as a bonus. And to learn more or to support me, please visit www.patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. Alrighty, back to class, poker peeps. So I would be remiss to not discuss some 3-bet bluff sizing and break-even math. Remember, you're bluffing here, so you want folds. You've got to size it enough whether in position or out of position, to get the folds that you're looking for. If your opponent is a passive station, you'll probably have to size it bigger to get folds, and if they're a massive nit or a tight aggressive player, then sizing it smaller may work just fine. Also, your position really does matter. People are more likely to fold when facing a 3-bet out of position than if they are in position, so size it bigger when bluffing out of position. And it's important to look at your opponent's fold to 3-bet stat. The higher the better. Anything over 67% over a large sample, it's good, as this is the cutoff break-even point for a standard 3x 3-bet over a 3 big blind open. So, for example, you make it 9 big blinds to win the total pot of 13.5 big blinds after your opponent makes a 3 big blind open. So 9 divided by the 13.5 pot equals 67%. So your 3-bet bluff needs to work 67% of the time just to break even. I generally like to see 75% fold to 3-bet or higher. This makes me much more comfortable when I'm 3-bet bluffing. And anybody over a large sample who's like 90% fold to 3-bet, oh man, I just love that. I 3-bet bluff so often against those guys, and it's totally profitable. And looking at this from the opener's viewpoint, he can, of course, 4-bet, or he can fold, but he can also call. He needs to call 6 big blinds to win the total pot of 19.5 big blinds. So, 6 divided by 19.5 means his hand needs only 31% equity. Lots of hands have this much equity versus a balanced 3-betting range that has value as well as some bluffs in it. If your opponent has Queen 10 suited, for example, he's got 31% equity versus a range of pocket 10s or better, Ace Jack suited or better, Ace Queen offsuit or better, and King Queen suited. The wider your 3-bet range, the more equity Queen 10 suited has against it. And you can see a screenshot of this equity calculation of the Queen 10 suited versus that range I just mentioned. You can see that in the show notes there. So you have to tailor your sizing to achieve your desired result, and tailor it based on the size you think your opponent will fold to. Oh yeah, it's time. Let's get to everyone's favorite move, the 3-bet squeeze. So just in case you don't know, a squeeze is a 3-bet over an open raise and one or more callers. The original raiser here, he might have a strong hand, but before he calls or 4-bets, he has to contend with how the callers will react and how the 3-better will react. And if you're 3-betting in position, then he's got to be concerned with going post-flop out of position versus possibly 2 or more other players. This puts maximum pressure on the original raiser to fight back with a strong hand or just ditch it entirely. And thinking about the callers, well, they've often limited their range to mid-strength hands, as they probably would have 3-bet with pocket jacks or better or ace-king. So you've got a perceived card advantage over them. Hopefully, you're making most of your 3-bet squeeze plays in position, as that gives extra incentive for the others to fold to your 3-bet aggression. And before you squeeze, you want to think about the players and how they'll react, as well as those yet to act. The same questions we asked earlier still apply here. So when you think about the opener's range, you want to consider their continuation range. Ideally, you're targeting someone who will fold a large part of their opening range. If someone is opening a 20% range, let's say, but will only continue in this spot with a super tight 3% range, they're folding out like 85% of their range, and this is a great one to target without a doubt. For the callers, you want to think about the range they originally called with and what they'll do versus our squeeze with that range. They probably can't fight back all that often against our 3-bet, because of their weaker capped range that they started the hand with. The more callers there are, the more players we need to fold to make our squeeze profitable. We may have to size it a little larger to get more callers to fold. I usually go with 3x plus 1 for each caller. So a 3 big blind open with a caller will get me to bet about 10 big blinds or so. I'll shade it bigger if I'm squeezing out of position or if they need a bigger incentive to fold. And for those players yet to act, you basically want people who readily fold to 3-bets and who aren't too aggressive and won't 4-bet without a premium hand. If the blinds are very passive and stationy, be careful, because if one or more blinds call, this gives great odds to the opener and the callers to call, making for a multi-way 3-bet pot, which of course you'll probably have to hit pretty darn hard to win. And just like when we're making a normal 3-bet bluff, our cards really do matter. You should look to have blockers to make it less likely your opponents will call. Also, choose hands that play well post-flop in case you do get called. And I try to look for great spots to try a 3-bet bluff squeeze. If it's not great and I think I'm likely to get callers, then I'll just call myself with suited connectors, weak suited aces, and small pocket pairs, or I'll just ditch the hand entirely. Alrighty, so how do we do some studying of 3-bet bluff hands? I do it in a pretty simple way in PokerTracker 4. Under your pre-flop actions and opportunities, turn on the Any 3-bet filter. Then, under Hand Values and Whole Card range Selection, choose all the hands in the matrix that aren't your general value 3-bet hands. I ran mine for all 100% of hands, except I took out Pocket 10s or better and Ace King. Bam! Every 3-bet bluff from Deuce 3 suited all the way through Ace Queen offsuit and everything in between popped up. As you go through the hands, ask yourself the 4 questions discussed earlier, and you're doing this in order to determine if this was a good 3-bet bluff spot or not. So those questions were, what's his opening range? How will he likely respond? What range does he continue with? Does he have any post-flop weaknesses? You can also submit some of your questionable hands to forums or the Smart Poker Study Facebook discussion group, to get some feedback from the participants there. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Search for good spots to 3-bet bluff and to 3-bet bluff squeeze. Before you pull the trigger, ask yourself if your 3-bet and the sizing you're about to use will get the job done, and if it will result in the folds you're looking for. For every 3-bet bluff or 3-bet bluff squeeze that doesn't work, tag it with your PokerTracker 4 software and review it the next day. Figure out why your 3-bet bluff didn't work. Did they actually have a good hand? Are they too passive and call too often, but you didn't realize it at the time? Were you out of position and the opponents never fold to 3-bets when in position? By asking yourself a very important question, and that question is, what did I do wrong? If you ask yourself that with all of these hands that you tagged, you'll be working to strengthen your game regardless of whether or not your 3-bet bluff was a good one to make. Now it's your turn to take action and do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
Okay, so to recap the episode, I discussed having a reason for every bet you make, and that is so very important when making 3-bet bluffs. Bigger pots mean more potential profit, but also more costly mistakes. You want to be reasonably sure you'll get the folds you want before you make the bluff. I also discussed how to make better 3-bet bluffs in general. You've got to consider the opponents involved in the hand, and look for indications that they will fold a majority of their opening range. You'd love to see a high fold to 3-bet of 75% or more. You also want nitty or tight blinds and nitty and tight players yet to act, because the last thing you want when making a 3-bet bluff is to get rebluffed or to face a multi-way pot due to a lot of callers. Your cards really do matter when 3-bet bluffing, and there's a huge difference between a complete bluff with 10-5 offsuit and a semi-bluff with ace-5 suited. Blockers like aces and kings are great, and hands with post-flop playability are preferred in case you get called and you're forced to see a flop. Keep in mind the break-even math on your bets, and you need to size it enough to get the necessary folds. You may have to shade your 3-bet bluffs bigger when making them out of position, as well as against multiple opponents like in a squeeze situation. And do that challenge and search for good 3-bet bluff opportunities during your next session. Your bankroll and your future aggressive self will thank you for this. If you're not already there, head on over to the show notes at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod107 for screenshots and links to everything mentioned today. Thank you so much for listening. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes, send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com, tweet it to me at smartpokerstudy, or post it in the Facebook group at www.smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. And I want those questions. Keep sending them in, please. And a quick shout out to Mrs. Anonymous, and I want to thank you for picking up PokerTracker 4 through my affiliate link. I think you're on your way to rocking the online poker world. But I know your first love is the live poker realm. You'll be on top of both soon enough, Mrs. Anonymous. For everyone else looking to get the best poker tracking software available, go through my link at www.smartpokerstudy.com/PokerTracker4. That's all one word with a number 4 at the end. And by going through that link and purchasing it, you support the show. You won't regret it. And if you send me your purchase confirmation, I'll send you my Smart HUD as a super big thank you very much. And of course, I want to thank our show sponsor today, habwin.com. Check out their winner free rolls every Sunday, 8 p.m. Central European Time. Visit www.habwin.com/free rolls to learn more and to register for free. Alrighty, poker peeps, be sure to come back next week for the 4th class in the 3-bet yin-yang MED, where I will get into defending versus 3-bets. And you're defending with either calls or well-placed 4-bet rebluffs, or of course 4-bet value bets as well. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thanks much for sharing this show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.
I want